The night air in the city of Veritas was thick. It was heavy with the heat of summer and, honestly, years of unspoken words. Officer Miller saw the car first, a sleek black sedan gliding down Sycamore Street. It was just too nice for this part of town, too clean. It screamed money, and to Miller, that screamed trouble. He had been on the force for 15 years, and he thought he knew the score. He had seen enough to make his heart hard. He trusted his gut, and his gut told him something was wrong. So, he flipped on the lights. The red and blue strobed across the brick buildings, painting the street in emergency colors. The sedan pulled over without any fuss. Smooth. Calm. Too calm. Miller's hand rested on his service weapon as he walked to the driver's side, his boots crunching on stray bits of glass. He peered into the window. A black man sat behind the wheel. He wore a tailored suit, the kind you only see on TV lawyers or big-shot executives. He looked straight ahead, his hands placed firmly on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Miller's suspicion sharpened. A man like that, in a car like this, in this neighborhood, the math just didn't add up in his head. He knocked on the glass, harder than he needed to. "License and registration," Miller said. His voice was flat, a tool he used to show he was in charge. The man didn't look at him right away. He just took a slow, deep breath. Then, he turned. His eyes were steady. They held a kind of weight that Miller wasn't expecting. There was no fear in them, no anger, just a quiet, powerful presence. The man reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately. He pulled out a wallet. He handed over his license. The name read, Marcus Thorne. Miller glanced at it, then back at the man. He was still waiting for the story to fall apart, for the lie to show itself. "What are you doing in this area, Mr. Thorne?" Miller asked. He leaned in closer, trying to get a read on the man, trying to find the crack in the perfect picture. He was looking for anything, a nervous twitch, a shaky hand, a lie in the eyes. But Marcus Thorne just met his gaze. He didn't offer a quick excuse. He didn't complain about the stop. He simply sat there, a silent challenge to every assumption Miller had ever made. The air between them crackled. It was more than just a traffic stop now. It was a confrontation of two worlds right there on the side of Sycamore Street. Marcus Thorne let the question hang in the air. He could feel the officer's judgment like a physical weight. He knew this dance all too well. He had lived it his whole life, even before he wore a badge himself. He had grown up just a few blocks from here. He remembered playing ball in the park down the street. He remembered the dreams he had and the hurdles he had to jump. Hurdles that often looked a lot like Officer Miller. He finally spoke, his voice even and controlled. "I live here, officer. Or I used to. Just visiting my old neighborhood. Is that a problem?" He wasn't just asking a question. He was making a point. Miller didn't like the man's tone. It felt like he was being tested. "I'll be the one asking the questions," Miller snapped back. He took the license back to his patrol car. He ran the name. Marcus Thorne. He waited for the system to spit out a record, a warrant, anything. But the screen came back clean. Not just clean, but decorated. There were commendations, a long service record, and a new title. Director, Internal Affairs Division. Miller stared at the screen. He read it again and again. The words blurred together. It couldn't be right. This man, his new boss? The world seemed to tilt for Officer Miller. The ground beneath his feet felt unsteady. He had built his career on instinct, on reading people. And he had just read the situation completely wrong. This wasn't a criminal. This was the man who would now be investigating cops just like him. The man who held the power to end his career. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He thought about every biased stop he had ever made, every assumption, every shortcut. They all came rushing back to him in that moment. He saw his own face reflected in the dark screen, and he didn't like the man looking back. Marcus Thorne watched the officer in his rearview mirror. He saw the stiff posture, the long pause. He knew the exact moment the truth landed. He had seen it before, the shock, the dawning, uncomfortable realization. This was why he had come back. Not just for a fancy title or a corner office. He came back for this. For moments like this. to stand at the crossroads of the city's pain and its power. He had returned to reform the force from the inside out, and his first unofficial case study was standing right outside his car, trying to figure out what to do next. The night was far from over. The incident on Sycamore Street didn't stay quiet for long. News travels fast in a city hungry for change. Director Thorne didn't file a formal complaint against Officer Miller. He didn't need to. He did something more powerful. He started a conversation. He opened the doors to his new office, not just to police brass, but to community leaders. He invited activists, pastors, and neighborhood organizers, people who had been shouting into the void for years. He told them the story of his traffic stop. He didn't tell it with anger. He told it as an example of a system that was broken, a system he was here to fix. His first official act was to create the Veritas Community Listening Project. He set up town halls in every precinct, not in sterile government buildings, but in school gyms, church basements, and community centers. He wanted to hear the stories of people who felt unseen and unheard by the police. He sat on folding chairs and listened for hours. He heard about broken taillights that led to handcuffs. He heard about young men being treated like criminals for standing on their own street corners. He heard the pain, the frustration, and the deep, abiding distrust that had poisoned the city for generations. Officer Miller heard about the town halls. He saw the flyers posted around the station. Some of the other cops laughed it off. They called it a PR stunt. "He's just trying to make us look bad," one of them grumbled. But Miller couldn't laugh. The memory of that night haunted him. He kept seeing Director Thorne's calm, steady eyes. He heard his own sharp, accusing voice. He started listening differently to the chatter in the locker room, the casual jokes, the us versus them language. He had always been a part of it. Now, for the first time, it sounded sour. It sounded wrong. The ripples of truth started to change the water. Director Thorne began reviewing old case files. He looked at complaints that had been dismissed without a real investigation. He looked at patterns of behavior, at officers who had racked up dozens of complaints with no consequences. He wasn't just on a fishing expedition. He was mapping the sickness inside the department. He knew that to heal the city, he first had to diagnose the disease. And every file he opened, every story he heard at a town hall, confirmed what he already knew in his gut. The problem was deep, it was systemic, and the work was just beginning. Inside his quiet office, surrounded by stacks of files, Marcus Thorne felt the weight of his city. Each file told a story of a life altered, a trust broken, a wound left to fester. He saw his own reflection in the polished wood of his desk. He saw the boy who grew up on Sycamore Street, who learned to make himself small to avoid trouble. He remembered the sting of being judged by the color of his skin, not the content of his character. He was the director now, a man with power, but the echoes of that boy were always with him. They were the fuel for his mission. They kept him honest. Meanwhile, Officer Miller was fighting his own battle. He went through the motions of his job, but everything felt different. He would drive through neighborhoods he used to patrol on autopilot, and now he saw faces. He saw families on their porches, kids playing in the street. He started to question the very foundation of his worldview. Was his gut instinct really instinct? Or was it just prejudice wearing a uniform? The thought was a bitter pill to swallow. He had always seen himself as one of the good guys, a protector. Now he saw a man who had caused harm. He was looking in a mirror and finally seeing the stranger he had become. Thorne's investigations were unearthing ugly truths. He found records of evidence being mishandled. He found reports that were clearly falsified to protect certain officers. It was a tangled web of loyalty and lies. He knew that bringing this to light would cause an earthquake within the department. He would be called a traitor. He would make powerful enemies. Some nights, the pressure was immense. He felt the loneliness of his position. But then he would remember the faces from the town halls. He remembered their stories, and he knew he could not turn back. He owed them the truth. Miller started to change, little by little. He began talking to people on his beat instead of just watching them. He would ask about their day. He learned their names. He started to see the community not as a source of threats, but as a collection of human beings. Some of his fellow officers noticed. They mocked him for it. "Getting soft, Miller?" they'd say. But their words didn't sting like they used to. He was starting to build a new kind of armor. Not the hard shell of suspicion he had worn for years, but something more resilient, something built on understanding. It was a slow, painful process of unlearning. The earthquake hit on a Tuesday morning. Director Thorne released his initial report. It was a bombshell. The report detailed years of misconduct within a specialized unit of the Veritas police force. It had everything: falsified reports, planted evidence, and a pattern of targeting minority communities. The report named names. It showed a clear cover-up that went high up the chain of command. The city, which had been simmering with tension, erupted. The report was not just a document. It was a confession. It was the department admitting that the community's worst fears were true. Protests ignited across Veritas. People flooded the streets, holding signs that read, "Justice now and no more lies." They marched to City Hall. They gathered outside police headquarters. Their anger was righteous and raw. They weren't just mad about the report. They were mad about the decades of pain that the report represented. For years, they had been told they were imagining things. They were told they were exaggerating. Now the truth was out, in black and white, for the whole world to see. The city held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Would there be real change, or just more empty promises? For the officers on the force, the report was a betrayal. Many felt they were being blamed for the actions of a few. The mood in the station houses turned toxic. They felt under siege from the public and betrayed by their own leadership. "He's throwing us to the wolves," one officer said of Thorne. They saw him not as a reformer, but as an enemy from within. The blue wall of silence, already cracked, began to crumble under the weight of anger and mistrust. The good officers, who did their jobs with integrity every day, felt their reputations being tarnished. Amid the chaos, Officer Miller read every word of the report. He recognized the names. He recognized the tactics. These were things he had heard whispers about for years but had chosen to ignore. He had looked the other way. He had told himself it wasn't his problem, but now he knew better. He was part of the problem. His silence had been a form of consent. The protests outside were not just about the officers in the report. They were about the culture that allowed them to operate, a culture that he had been a part of. The city was demanding accountability, and for the first time, Miller knew he had to answer that call. A week after the report dropped, Director Thorne called another community meeting. This time, it was in the city's central public square. Thousands of people came. The mood was tense. The trust was gone. Thorne stood on a makeshift stage, not behind a podium, but right at the edge. He didn't start with excuses or defenses. He started with an apology. "We have failed you," he said, his voice ringing out across the square. "We have broken your trust, and we are here today to start the long, hard road of earning it back. Words are not enough. Today, we begin with action." Then, something unexpected happened. Thorne invited others to speak. He didn't just invite community leaders, he invited officers. He said that true accountability meant everyone had to be part of the solution. A few officers spoke, their voices shaky. They talked about their commitment to the city, but the crowd remained skeptical. Then, Officer Miller walked to the microphone. He was not in uniform. He wore civilian clothes. He looked out at the sea of faces, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw suspicion. He saw pain. He saw the community he had sworn to protect, but had helped to harm. "My name is Dave Miller," he began, his voice cracking. "I've been a police officer in this city for 15 years, and for most of that time, I was part of the problem." A hush fell over the crowd. "I judged people based on what they looked like, or what car they drove, or what neighborhood they were in. I thought I was using my instinct, but I was just using my prejudice. I hid behind my badge, and I refused to see the real harm I was causing. I looked the other way when I saw things that were wrong, and for that, I am truly sorry." He looked directly at Director Thorne. "You were right to stop me. You were right to challenge me, and I am here to say that I am ready to change." His words were not a magic wand. They didn't erase the years of pain, but they were a start. They were a crack of light in the darkness. A single, honest voice admitting fault. It was a promise, a public promise to be better, to listen, to learn, to help rebuild what he and others had helped to break. Director Thorne stepped forward and put a hand on Miller's shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was a sign that forgiveness was possible. That change was possible. It was a promise that the work of building a new kind of justice would be done together. In the months that followed, the promise made in the public square began to take shape. Director Thorne and Officer Miller became an unlikely team. They didn't just work together in an office. They went back out into the community. They started a new program at the police academy. It focused on teaching recruits about the city's history, about empathy, and about the dangers of unconscious bias. Miller, drawing from his own painful self-realization, became one of its most powerful instructors. He shared his story with the young cadets. He told them about his mistakes, hoping they wouldn't repeat them. They also started a youth outreach program. They spent their weekends in community centers and parks, the very places where the seeds of mistrust were often planted. They shot hoops with teenagers. They listened to their dreams and their fears. Marcus Thorne, the director, became just Marcus. Dave Miller, the cop, became just Dave. They were no longer just symbols of authority. They were becoming neighbors. They were building bridges, one conversation at a time. They were showing the city's youth that a different kind of relationship between the police and the community was possible. The change wasn't easy. There was still resistance within the department. There was still skepticism in the community. Healing is not a straight line. But for every person who doubted, there was a young cadet whose eyes were opened. There was a teenager who saw a police officer as a person for the first time. There was a community meeting that ended not in shouting, but in a shared understanding. Miller and Thorne were planting seeds. They knew they might not see the full harvest themselves, but they were tending the garden for the next generation. They were building a foundation of responsibility and trust. This is the power of a story. The story of a traffic stop on Sycamore Street became something more. It became a catalyst for change. It forced a man to look in the mirror and confront the person he had become. It brought another man home to heal the wounds of his past. It sparked a city to demand a better future. Stories show us who we are, but they also show us who we can become. They have the power to break down walls, to open hearts, and to remind us that even at the most difficult crossroads, we have the choice to build a bridge toward justice and a better